Hi, my name's Clodagh Beaty and I'm delighted to host this week's Executive Support Admin Chat. I'm a leadership and organisational development specialist and the co-creator of the Emotional Salary Barometer alongside Marissa Elizundia. Now, the Emotional Salary Barometer is a tool that measures the non-financial or emotional benefits that we get from our work. And we work with organisations to help them create working environments with high levels of emotional salary. And that means everybody can thrive and use their work as a platform for growth and development. And we do that with the Emotional Salary Barometer and our training and coaching programs for leaders and employees. But I actually started my career many years ago as a secretary, and I worked as a secretary and an executive assistant for around 10 years before I moved into human resources and training and development. And I left my corporate role as an HR manager around 13 years ago to set up my own training and consultancy business. But I have to say that my experience as a secretary and executive assistant was the best foundation I could have had for my career and left me with so many valuable skills that I've been able to develop in my career going forward. Now, today's session has been designed to be as flexible as possible. I'm a real fan of having practical solutions for sessions, so it has got a very practical slant. Whether you listen to the audio only while you're busy doing other things, whether you watch it at double speed because you're really short on time, or even if you're just whizzing through and looking for the juicy bits, you should still be able to get what you need from it. As I said, it's a practical session, and my aim is to give you a really clear roadmap that you can use to get more autonomy at work. But first, I want to talk a little bit more about autonomy and emotional salary, just to give you a little bit of background. So what is emotional salary and why is it important? Now, if I asked you why you work, many of you would probably say for the money. And that's a perfectly valid reason. It's the same for most people. But if I asked you why you left your last job, a large percentage of you, I would say probably around 65%, would say that it wasn't for financial reasons, but for emotional reasons. Now, by emotional reasons, I mean things like a lack of career development opportunities, feeling like you're not trusted and respected to do your job, or perhaps feeling that your role isn't aligned with your purpose and your values. Now, these are all examples of what we mean by emotional salary. And here is the definition that we use when it comes to emotional salary. The non-financial benefits of working that motivate us, change our perception of work, and lead to personal and professional development. Now, most of us are not consciously aware of our emotional salary until we're prompted to examine it. Now, that lack of awareness can be a problem because it means we don't recognise what's important to us, sometimes until we no longer have it. So, for example, when we get a new boss who works maybe a little bit differently, or when we change jobs, or what we tend to do often at work is focus more on what we don't have rather than appreciating what we do have. And this is another area where being aware of our emotional salary can help us. Now, this negativity bias of focusing on the negative things rather than the positive means that when it comes to our work, we're more likely to spend way more time thinking about what we don't like, what's not going well, rather than appreciating what is going well. I think we've all been in situations where that's happened to us. We can get into this spiral of negative thoughts. Now, this can be an issue because it can lead to us to feel demotivated, disengaged, because we're not acknowledging what's going well. And generally, when we're demotivated and disengaged, our performance tends to suffer and we're not doing as good a job as we possibly could be. But even if we are aware of our emotional salary, we need to maintain that awareness on an ongoing basis, Because if we don't, we can start taking our emotional salary for granted over a period of time. We get used to what we have. It just feels familiar and normal, and we don't appreciate it anymore. So awareness is the first step. When we gain awareness of what's important to us in relation to the emotional benefits that we get from our work, we can start to appreciate what we have and understand what we don't have. Now, this leads to a shift in our perception about our work, and it empowers us to really take responsibility and to think about, how we want to develop our work, how we want to develop our career going forward. But it does work both ways, because when we start to look at our emotional salary, if we discover that we're lacking some emotional benefits that are really important to us, then we have a choice. We either stay in our current role and explore how we can get more of what's important to us, or perhaps we take the decision to move on and look elsewhere for a role that's going to give us more of those emotional benefits. And this is where, the relationships we have at work and the role of our manager and the role of the team we're working in, the culture of the team and the organisation, this becomes critical here, because if they support us to explore and develop our emotional salary and look for opportunities to increase it, then obviously we're more likely to stay and be much more satisfied in our work. We'll feel listened to, we'll feel valued, and we'll feel way more motivated. Now, we started an extensive research project into, the emotional benefits that we get from our work around 5 years ago. And as a result of our research, we discovered that there were 10 factors really that contributed to our emotional salary. And one of those factors, which is the one we're going to be talking about today and going into in a lot more detail, is autonomy. And you can see here the other factors: belonging, which is about feeling connected, appreciated and valued at work; creativity, which is about exploring, developing, expressing our original ideas, not just for creative jobs; direction, which is about our career and being able to co-create a fulfilling career path. And obviously autonomy has a really important role to play in that as well. There's a relationship there. Enjoyment, having fun and authentic social interactions at work. Inspiration, which is about having an alignment with our values, which leads us to a sense of possibility and gaining new insights that's going to help us in our work. Mastery, working towards achieving true excellence in our work. Personal growth, which is gaining self-awareness and becoming a better person, a better human being. And professional growth, developing our professional skills, abilities and talents. And last but certainly not least, purpose. So this is about feeling that our work has meaning and that we're contributing to something bigger. So this gives you a little snapshot about what we're talking about when we start looking at our emotional salary. So as you saw from the previous slide, I had a huge list of potential topics that I could have talked about today. There are 10 different factors of emotional salary. So why did I choose autonomy? Now, when we think about autonomy in relation to our emotional salary, this comes from a theory of human motivation, which was developed by a couple of psychologists in the context of something called self-determination theory. And those psychologists were Edward Deci and Richard Ryan. Now, when we think about autonomy in these terms, it's about being in charge of our experiences and our actions, which is perhaps slightly different from the definition that we might have in our head, the traditional idea of autonomy, that autonomy is about freedom and independence. And when we think about it in a work context, this makes sense, because it's unrealistic to think that we can have complete freedom and independence in our work. You know, the reality is that even when you're the boss, or even when you have your own business or you're a freelancer, you still have certain constraints. So what we mean by autonomy is more about having enthusiasm and eagerness to participate in various activities, tasks, or behaviours, and doing so because they're in alignment with our interests and our values. There's this sense of option and choice, which allows us to engage in activities wholeheartedly rather than just acting on something purely because we're doing what we're told. Now, more and more studies are showing that embracing autonomy in the workplace leads to really positive effects on well-being and job satisfaction. And increased autonomy at work is really, really important when it comes to career development as well. Now, when I worked as a secretary, I was always looking at different ways I could progress and develop in my career. And I quickly found that increasing my autonomy and taking on more responsibility was a great way to do that. I could learn about different areas, I could increase and enhance my skills. I was able to broaden my experience and knowledge. And really, you know, through increasing my autonomy, I was able to become much more valuable to my manager, more valuable to my colleagues, and to future employers as well. So that was quite a theoretical look at autonomy, but what do we actually mean by autonomy? This is the definition that we use for autonomy in terms of our emotional salary. So the opportunity to have freedom in a work context in which the person feels respected and trusted as a competent individual who's provided with the space to choose and manage their own organisational style, projects and time on a basis that's congruent with their own values. Now, notice that it's not about flexible working, it's not about working from home, but what it is about is being respected, being trusted, being recognised as being competent, being given freedom to manage how we work, and being given that freedom on a basis that aligns with our values. Now, it sounds amazing. Who wouldn't want more autonomy? But like most things, there is a flip side. I think this quote is a really good one to have in mind when we think about autonomy. So the twin sister to autonomy and freedom is responsibility and accountability. You cannot have one without the other. And that's a quote by Henry Cloud. Now, autonomy takes discipline. And if you want that trust and respect, you do have to prove that you've earned it. So hopefully by now you've got a much clearer idea of what we mean by autonomy. So now we're going to move on to the practical part of today's session. And by the end of today's session, you're going to have a much clearer idea of how you can get more autonomy at work. And the way we're going to do that is, first of all, I'm going to take you through a self-assessment to help you identify whether you're ready for more autonomy, what autonomy means for you, and how you can identify areas to increase your autonomy. Then I'm going to guide you through your personal action plan so that you can increase your autonomy, progress in your career, and hopefully increase your well-being at work. So the first question to ask yourself is, are you ready for more autonomy? Now, there may be many reasons why you don't want autonomy at this point in your life or at this point in your career, and that's absolutely fine. It doesn't mean that you can't or won't progress in your career, and it doesn't mean that you're not very valuable to your manager and your colleagues. But I'm going to take you through some questions that will give you a good idea of whether or not you are ready for more autonomy at work. So the first question is, do you like to be given a job with just a few instructions and then be allowed to get on with it? Are you comfortable working towards goals with a flexible roadmap that you might even have to design? And can you manage your time well and meet deadlines with little or no guidance from your manager? Now, if you answered yes to all three of these questions, then you're likely to be ready for more autonomy at work. Okay, so you know you want more autonomy, and we've talked about autonomy as a concept, but it's not a great idea to march up to your manager and say, hey, I want more autonomy, because your manager could have a completely different idea of what autonomy is to the one that you do. So when you request more autonomy at work, it's really important to have a clear idea about exactly how you would define it and what your expectations are before you do so. And it's also really important to think about the situation from your manager's perspective. And the following questions we're going to explore here will really help you do this. Now, if you haven't experienced any of these scenarios, then don't worry. Just imagine what your response would be to the best of your ability. So the first one, do you feel like you work best within a firm structure and timeline? Do you feel like you work best with expectations that are clearly and regularly articulated by your manager? Do you get anxious or irritated in ambiguous or changing conditions? Or do you get anxious or irritated when the boundaries of your job description occasionally blur? Now, you should be starting to get more of an idea about what autonomy means for you, about what your non-negotiables are. Maybe you want more autonomy, but you need to have very clear guidelines and structures in place rather than having carte blanche to do exactly what you want. Or maybe you want more autonomy, but only in certain situations. So it's important to think about what exactly it is that you want. Now that you know what autonomy looks like for you, you can start to explore how you can get more. And there are several important steps in this process. So before we start exploring autonomy, we're going to look at those steps. Now, firstly, you've got to think about what areas your manager could realistically give you more autonomy. So some examples here could be perhaps more autonomy in organising your work priorities or in selecting projects that you work on. The next thing to think about is, what are the risks for your manager of giving you more autonomy? Now, some examples here could be perhaps you prioritise work in a different way to that of your manager. Maybe if you start taking on more autonomy, then some of the existing projects or tasks that you do might not be done as quickly as they have been in the past. So what you really need to do is to think about what you can do to mitigate those risks. So perhaps that would be agreeing some general guidelines for prioritising work with your manager. Or, perhaps having the opportunity to select one project a month that you can work on. Finally, what you need to think about is, what are the expectations that you have of your manager? Perhaps you need them to be more open with you about what their priorities are or what they're working on. Perhaps you need them to respond to your questions or give you a little bit of feedback within a particular time period. Now, what we're going to do next is spend a little bit of time on step 1 before we come back and revisit these other steps. A great way to explore where you can get more autonomy is reviewing your existing tasks. Now, although you might not be able to choose which tasks you're assigned, you are likely to have some control over your workflow, over how you accomplish your tasks and how you structure your time. And whatever flexibility you do have, it's worthwhile thinking about that and structuring your workload in the way that works best for you. Now, the first thing to think about is your task list. So I would encourage you to write down perhaps a daily or weekly plan or schedule and include in that any regular tasks that you do, any perhaps meetings or calls that you have on a regular basis, so that you can easily kind of refer to this and update it as needed. Now, with this, think about what you can do to manage your working conditions so that you can have maximum freedom. So look at the task list and think about how you can manage your work. The next thing to think about as you look at that task list is how much flexibility do you currently have? And think about this in different areas. So for example, how much flexibility do you have on timelines? Can you decide when certain tasks can be done? How much flexibility do you have in relation to stakeholder relationships? And what I mean by that is the relationships you have with people during the course of your work. So for example, do you have the freedom to select which suppliers you might use in certain situations? Another area to think about flexibility is in relation to communication. Can you decide which communication channels to use? Can you decide when you check your messages? Another area is how you organise tasks. Can you decide how you prioritise your tasks? Are there certain things you can delegate? And the last thing to think about when you're reviewing your task list is how important is it for you to have more autonomy for these particular tasks? Another area to explore where you can get more autonomy is identifying potential new tasks. So think about what your manager does. What additional tasks can you take on? How can you free up their time? What tasks can you do that will enable them to work more strategically? What about processes or procedures? Can you improve any of the processes or procedures in your department or in your organisation? Do you have ideas on how they can be improved? What can you do that will improve efficiency or make your managers or colleagues' lives easier? And lastly, are there any areas where you could upskill or improve your knowledge so that would enable you to take on new and different tasks? Once you've taken the time to explore in detail how you might be able to increase your autonomy, you can start making your action plan. Now, first, obviously, you need to identify exactly where and how you want to increase your autonomy. And you can do that based on that review of your existing tasks and identifying any new tasks that we've just done. Now, I recommend in taking it slowly. Now, you might want to start with one area. And even if you're confident that you can take on more, then I would suggest maybe focusing on one area and a maximum of 3, because you don't want to overwhelm yourself. You need to be careful not to take on more than you can realistically do. You've got to remember that by taking on more autonomy, you may have to change the way you work, or your workload might increase. And if you take on too much in your quest for autonomy, your well-being at work and your work performance may suffer. You could lose the trust of your manager and colleagues if you overpromise and underdeliver. So really take care in selecting the tasks where you want to increase your autonomy, and take it slowly. Now, once you've done this, you need to go through the process that we talked about earlier. So this is about evaluating any risks from your manager's perspective and thinking about how you plan to overcome those risks. Thinking clearly about what your expectations are, what help, support or training that you might need to enable you to take on more autonomy. When you've done these things, you're finally ready to meet with your manager and put forward your proposal for more autonomy. So, how should you make your proposal to give it the best chance of success? Now, the best way is probably in person or via video conference if you're working remotely. But if you know that the only way to get your manager to review something is by sending them the proposal in email, then that's the way to do it. You know your manager better than I do, so feel free to make some adjustments here to the guidelines that I'm giving you. The first thing you need to do is to pick the right time to talk about it. Now, nobody wants an ambush. Nobody wants a conversation when they're running out of the door to a meeting. So I really would recommend that you arrange a specific time and let your manager know in advance what you're going to be talking about. Now, I know it can be difficult when your manager's constantly on the go, but try and schedule a time when there are likely to be no distractions or interruptions, or at least minimal distractions and interruptions. The next thing is to set out very clearly the areas that you think you would benefit from having more autonomy over. You have to be really clear and concise here. Avoid lengthy explanations where possible, and remember that your manager may not understand things to the level of detail that you do when it comes to your work. Quite often they just see the end results of your work. They don't know the lengthy process that you might go through to get to that end result, and they might not care about that. Now, the next thing that's really important to gain buy-in is to be really clear about how you think this change will benefit them. Whether it's about freeing up their time, improving efficiency in the team or in the organisation, or perhaps making their life a little bit easier, making it a bit less stressful. But whatever you do, try and point out the real benefits to them in your gaining more autonomy. It's really important that you make it clear to them that you've thought about this change from their perspective. So if there are any potential risks, show them that you've thought about them and show them how you plan to mitigate those risks. The next area is really to be very clear about what your expectations are of them. If you're going to need them to respond in a certain time frame, or maybe to spend a little bit of time training or coaching you in the early stages, then now really is the time to tell them. And finally, ask them what they think of your proposal. If you think they seem a little bit unsure, then maybe ask them if it's something that you can do on a short trial period. If they do say no, then ask them if they're willing to share their thought process about why they don't agree. Now, this might be difficult to hear, but it will help you to identify whether you need to work on improving your skills in certain areas, or whether it's time for you to think about developing your role or career in another team or organisation. we do sometimes come across people who find it very difficult to let go and to give their assistants more responsibility. So, you know, if more responsibility and more autonomy is something that's very important for you, and you find yourself in the situation where your manager is one of those people, then you need to weigh up how important having that autonomy is for you. Now, I hope that's given you a step-by-step guide into what autonomy is, what it means for you, and how you can work towards getting more autonomy at work. Hopefully, it's also kind of given you a little bit of curiosity about learning more about your emotional salary. So I want to share with you some ways where you can delve into the topic of emotional salary in a little bit more detail. So there are various different ways. Now, I wrote an article for Executive Support magazine, which you'll find in the August and September issue, August-September 2022 of the magazine, and you can see here that there's a link for you to access that article online. If you'd like to learn more about the concept of emotional salary, then we have a great free quiz on our website, and this is where you'll find it. Go to our website, emotional-salary.com/quiz. It won't tell you your emotional salary, but it will help you gain an awareness of what emotional salary is. So if you'd like to measure your own emotional salary and get a personalised report and action plan with tips to increase your emotional salary, then obviously you can take the emotional salary barometer, and you'll be able to do that by going to our website. You've got details there, and to take the emotional salary barometer costs you €20. Another way you can keep up to date and find out more about emotional salary is by signing up to our newsletter. We send out a monthly newsletter, and you'll find the link to sign up on our website. Another way to keep up to date and to get regular updates is to follow us on social media. We use LinkedIn as our primary social media channel, so you can follow us there, emotional-salary-barometer. So I've already talked about taking the emotional salary barometer. All that remains is for me to say thank you for sticking with me to the end of this session. I really do hope you've enjoyed it and found it valuable. If you'd like more information, or even if you have any questions at all about anything I've talked about today, or you think your team or organisation could use some help in discovering emotional salary, then please do get in touch with me. I'm always happy to talk about this topic, which is my passion. So here you'll find some ways that you can get in touch with me. You have my email address here, clodagh@emotional-salary.com. You can connect with me personally directly on LinkedIn. And please do reach out if you have any questions at all. Thank you.